Welcome to the Dreamboat. Remember, you can join the DRI for just £30 a year. You get access to more content, including videos and discounts for our events. It's a great way of finding out more about our work, joining our dream community, and supporting this podcast. Details in the show notes and at driccpe.org.uk/membership. Welcome to the Dreamboat podcast, a place where we talk about everything dreamy. All you wanted to know about dreams and where you might find some answers. My name is Dave Billington, and I'm a psychotherapist, and I'm also director of the Dream Research Institute. And I'm joined by fellow psychotherapist Laura Payne.
Hello, I'm Laura Payne, and I'm also part of the Dream Research Institute. And we're called the Dreamboat because we are recording our podcast overlooking the beautiful canal barges here at Little Venice in London.
We'll be looking at dreams, talking to guest experts, and answering your questions.
Now, let's get on with the episode. So, welcome. When we dream, many influences are infiltrating our imaginations, which then get processed in the imagery, I would say, of our dreams. And many of these are what you would call common archetypes, images that have universal themes in some way, and they sort of transcend time and place. Astrology, for some, is a key part of this dream symbolism. What do you think, Maria?
I am fascinated by astrology as I'm a trainee astrologer and have been for the last few years. So I am very excited about the guest we have today to talk about where astrology and dreams meet and how we can blend these two together.
Yes, I'm thrilled to introduce our guest today, Dr. Laurence Hillman, who has worked in this area for many years.
Born and raised in Zurich, Switzerland, Dr. Hillman became immersed in archetypes at the age of 16 and has remained his passion for 48 years. He is a professional archetypal coach specializing in helping clients understand their deeper purpose and life's calling through these challenging times. He is also a consultant. He lectures internationally in astrology in all colleges around the world. He is also the co-creator of Archetypes at Work, a cutting-edge method to assess and develop people and organizations to become fit for the future. And he is the author of Planets in Play, How to Reimagine Your Life Through the Language of Astrology, and the co-author of Alignments, How to Live in Harmony with the Universe, and also the co-author of the Archetypes at Work, Evolving Your Story, One Character at a Time. Laurence, you're very prolific and busy and a celebrated teacher. So as I said earlier, it's such an honor to have you on the podcast today.
Well, thank you. Thank you for the kind invitation and for having me on. So what are we going to talk about? Dreams.
Yes, dreams. Astrology and dreams. I suppose the obvious question, Laurence, is, how does astrology surface in dreams? What should we be looking for?
So the way I think about it is that, Jung talked about that there's sort of two parts of the unconscious. There's the personal unconscious that we're not aware of, but that has a whole lot to say about what we're doing at any moment. I think neuroscience tells us about 90% of our activities are unconscious to us, so they come from there. And then there's the collective unconscious, which is the great contribution from Jung to consciousness in my mind, or consciousness research or thinking. And then the collective unconscious is, we're also bathing in that. And so to me, dreams are a way that we access both of those. So some dreams are quite personal, they're personal unconscious, and sometimes we have more prophetic or more universal or more archetypal kind of dreams when we sort of dream into the collective unconscious. And so that to me is how I would differentiate the sort of the quality of dreams. Some dreams are just sort of, pedestrian and daily and fun and maybe interesting about our personal stuff. And some are much more prophetic and meaningful and deep and important, but that doesn't make the other ones less interesting. They're just different. And so ultimately what dreams show us is that there's a way to map, is probably the best word, to map the unconscious or our inner life, if you want. And what astrology does is just it's a tool that maps the unconscious. So that's what they have in common. Basically, astrology shows you a map of your inner life. And dreams can show you sort of a temporary picture, a temporary moment in time of your inner life or your inner map. So, if we use an archetypal lens, if we think about our inner life archetypally, and we imagine that things aren't, literal, but we do, as my father used to say, see through the literal and see the archetype behind it, or underneath it, or in it, however we want to imagine that, then we have a different access to the richness of the image. And so it doesn't become, the literal, it becomes the imagined. There's a famous story of my father sitting in front of, or maybe standing in front of 100 psych students and asking, a woman dreams of a snake going into a tunnel, what does it mean? And 100 hands shoot up, and they all have explanations that we can probably think of 100 right now very quickly, because that's the sort of standard Freudian approach. And then he says, you're all wrong because you all just killed the snake.
Exactly.
And so there's a lot of wisdom in that little story, because there's a huge risk, and it's very human to want to interpret dreams and ask, what do they mean? And how, what is it telling me? And how can I get good fortune out of this information? And how can I help make decisions based on what's there, and so on. And so I think the wisdom is to really do what my father suggested, which was to work with the dream and not try to understand what it's trying to tell me, but just to work with it and see what that creates, what new imagery comes up in us, and what it does to our physical bodies when we co-create with the imagery that's being given to us. So dream work to me is about, working the dream. To me means, of course, we're all going to interpret at some level. It's human nature. But it's just like everybody wants to predict with astrology, even though I don't believe you can. So there's just certain things that are just natural that people want to do because it's human, but it's not the best use of the tool. So the best use of the tool of the dream for me is to recognize patterns and to recognize stories and to activate the imagery that can then be archetypally understood and then translated back into my personal map, which is my chart. So I've been doing dreams and astrology back and forth for a long time. I haven't done it in a while, but for a while I was quite active in it. And I started a lecture in Seattle at the Jung Society many years ago, probably a couple of decades. And a woman came up to me and said she was really interested, and she was a professional astrologer for a long time and wanted to study with me. I said, well, I've never really taught this stuff, but, I do it. And so we sort of came up with this curriculum and worked together for a while, and she ended up writing a book on it about dreams and astrology, which is quite extraordinary. And so, we worked dreams. She had her friends or clients give her dreams, and then we worked them together archetypally, looking for archetypal patterns that are both astrological and that show up as imagery in the dream. So to me, it's just what they have in common is that they both map our insides in different ways, but they both do it through images if we use archetypal astrology as an imaginal language of imagery, which is how I do it.
So we should say for listeners that when Laurence talks about his father, he's talking about the famous psychologist James Hillman, who was a student of Jung and took Jung's work and developed it very significantly in his own way, in particular looking at the whole subject and matter of archetypes. And Laurence, it's lovely to hear how you yourself have, taken the baton and run even more with it in a very significant direction. I love the snake example. I remember reading it years ago when I was in training, and at the DRI we very firmly believe, as listeners know, that there can be all sorts of symbolism, but in the end, what does the snake mean for you, and how are we going to explore that in your body as much as anything else? We use what we call the waking dream technique, which is very ancient and has been adapted, obviously. But again, let's not chase the snake away is a lovely line.
And symbols are dead. The symbols are golden calves. They're dead, and they're materialized imagery. And even if they're just abstract, they're still sort of we've shaped it and given it a name and a sticker, and that just kills it. And so, Yes, it's important to use symbolic thinking as a way to make connections and to think about, well, this over here reminds me of that over there. That's fine, and symbols can do that. It can be a shorthand. There's certain advantages to symbolic thinking, but making a dream image a thing, it destroys it. And so we want to keep alive in the imagination and ask a lot of questions. And people then start, well, what did the snake feel like? What was it? Was it slimy? Did it talk? Did it say something? Did it move fast? Did it move slowly? Was it dark? Was it light outside? Were there stars in the sky? All kinds of things we could ask and start to get an image. And as the dreamer then goes back into the scene in their mind, something important happens in the soul. And that's the richness of this kind of work.
It's beautiful when you talk about soul and this level of understanding. It takes me back to the huge insight I gained from astrology, having studied at CCP, transpersonal psychotherapy, and then going to astrology and finding a deeper layer of soul in there and being able to understand myself. There's something so rich of having years of dream journals and then looking at my chart and understanding the kind of dynamics and patterns that I find myself in over and over again, and then being able to see that repeating over and over in my dreams and changing maybe through my dreams. And it feels like a beautiful place to anchor, to ground the dream work.
Yes, and I think another thing that the dreams and astrology have in common is they both have to defend against idiocy, or against superficiality, because so many people say, oh, I dreamt about this, like I said, the silly snake example, or I dream about this, it means that, and there's, you can Google it and it tells you this, you can buy a dream symbol book, and then when you dream about that, it means that, and it's just, it's so, it's the same thing as doing sun sign astrology. I'm a Libra, therefore I hate people who are Aries or stupid stuff like that. These ideas are silly, and there is, to go to the depth that dreams can offer, it takes work. It's a journey. There's a reason they were called mystery schools. It's not something you can just download and Google and know. It's a process that is very personal and that activates your imagination in a way that cannot just be consumed. And so it takes it's a work, it's process, it's a really personal, it is a journey in that sense that we have to explore, and we have to find out, and we have to be willing to meet some ugly creatures when we go inside ourselves and look at our stuff and our stories and our, Jung called them complexes, the things that have us. I always say, you do the gods or the gods do you. And so however conscious you become around this inner work, the more you're doing the gods, which to me is a form of freedom, and not being, a puppet on a string. So of these inner forces. And so consciousness helps in that sense. Consciousness is actually a path to freedom in my mind.
So I'm going to be horribly practical. This is my moon in Capricorn. How does it
Welcome, me too. I got moon in Capricorn. I'm very practical too. Good for
exactly.
you.
So here you'll recognise this then, Laurence. Mm-hmm. How does it work? So if I came to you and you looked, what do you do? Would you look at my chart and then follow my dreams over a process of time to see whether it matches characteristics of my chart? If we got down to the nitty-gritty, what would somebody see? How would it work?
Yeah, so what's really fun for me about the process is that it's incredibly intuitive. So when I give these presentations or these lectures, there's really no way to prepare, because it really is in the moment. And this is it's literally a trust fall. It is falling into the dream and into the moment and into the people in the room, and trusting that, imagery will emerge. And so I never know what's going to happen. I have very little preparation except getting people's charts. So the chart is up on the wall, and then, Anthony sits in the back, and Anthony starts telling a dream while Anthony's chart is up on the wall. And then depending on people's level of knowledge, they might, something might happen to them by just looking at the chart, just from the image. Others might know a little bit more astrology and might start to see some of the dream imagery coming out in the chart, and others might, sometimes it's very literal. I dreamt I killed my mother and they have a Mars-Moon opposition. Okay, so we can see that. That's kind of simple. But then even if you see that, it's not like, oh, okay, look, there it is. Then it's like, okay, but what is this? Why is this activating now? Why did that come up in the dream? Why is this important to be talking about? What astrology is essentially, to summarize what astrology is for me, it is a tool that measures the quality of a moment. So we always have the quantity of a moment by looking at the watch, but the quality of what kind of time is what astrology answers. And so if somebody has a dream, it's also being dreamt within a certain quality of a moment, what Jung call, or not Jung, but what Germans call the zeitgeist. So the spirit of the time is embedded in the dream as well. And of course, astrology as a clock to measure the quality of the moment is a very useful tool to say, oh, well, this dream was being dreamt during this massive transit, or during this massive upheaval, or during this massive rejuvenation, or whatever is going on in the person, which we can see, astrologically. So there's a strong correlation between the dream, and I was at when somebody said, well, this is a recurring dream, or this is a dream I never forgot that I had 25 years ago. It's different than if I dreamt this last week, because right now, last week, I'm in this sort of moment, in this time quality, and I want to put that into the imagery that comes. But what I look for and what I hope for practically is that we start making some meaning of the chart through the dream that the client presents. It's not an ongoing process. It can be a one-time insight. Yes, sure, it can be an ongoing process if we do dreams over time. But to me, it's very much that I get immensely triggered in a positive way with imagery when I hear stories. I mean, it just pops into my head. So when someone tells me dream and I'm looking at the chart, it usually, and I hope that still works, I haven't done it for a while, we'll see, images come to mind, and then we can maybe make some more sense of the chart that we couldn't without the dream. That's the purpose. And the chart to me contains so much. I've looked at mine, for 48 years and know probably half of it. That's not an exaggeration. You can never say you know your chart fully. Just like a conductor can never say they know how to, that she knows how to conduct Beethoven's Fifth fully. There's always another way to make changes and learn something new. So it's a symphony, and there's lots to learn. And so the dreams can be additional tools to teach us something about the current moment that we're in, and basic patterns that are always there, and which we're playing with, we can see in various technical ways. If this is more something that's generally there, or something that's currently there, and so forth. So it's it's an enhancing tool to use dreams to understand the chart better, because in the chart is everything, and we can spend a lifetime learning about all that everything that's there. There's so much wisdom in it, so much understanding, and so many different layers of depth, and the dream can just help unlock more of the imagery that's there, and then make that connection to our lives in a practical way. Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say that one thing that I really like about how you talk about astrology and dreams is you keep referring to gods. And maybe it would be good to just explain what you mean by that a little bit, because it seems like you're not talking just about interpreting dream at a fully just personal level. You're taking it to the archetypal, to the mystical.
So I consider myself an archetypal astrologer. That's a very simple statement that basically says I'm going to argue that everybody who does astrology is an archetypal astrologer, because what that really means is that we see the planets as archetypes, meaning universal figures. And so, I would argue again, every astrologer says that, because if I say Mercury isn't your Mercury, it's Mercury that is universal. And that same Mercury applies to someone who looks very different from you and lives on the other side of the world. It's still a Mercury, because we're all born under the same sky. And so an archetype to me is a universal experience, or a universal image that everyone recognizes. So when I say storyteller, it doesn't matter where you go in any culture, everywhere people understand that archetype, which we would then translate in astrology to Mercury. So we have these core images that exist in us, and while there are endless archetypes, the 10 that have emerged over millennia in the astrological model are suitable to describe any human experience. I've never seen a human experience in 48 years of dealing with this daily that you can't describe through, a or a combination of the 10 planets / archetypes. So when I say archetypes, gods, the reason I would call them gods is because most of them have names of gods, and that was the Greek version of seeing, the gods was through seeing the planets was through the gods, and the Romans and many cultures do that. And so, and it's also it's also a strong statement about inner multiplicity versus monotheism. So that's why I like to use the word. So this notion that we have these inner figures or characters or actors, I actually think of them as actors. I use the theater metaphor a lot. And so these parts of us that we can step into, and people say, well, that's not how we are. Developmental psychologists say, no, we are a single identity, and what you're doing is dangerous. You're splitting up a personality, and I have an I, and first I sit, then I crawl. First I crawl, then I sit, then I walk, then I run. That's development. Yeah, except that's not how we actually experience ourselves. If you've ever had a conversation with yourself, part of me wants this, a part of me wants that. Should I stay with him? Should I leave her? These conversations we're having all day long. That's a proof that we actually have inner voices that can talk to each other and can argue with each other. And that is a very intense reality that it's a much more suitable language to talk about inner multiplicity, which was always the case until monotheism came around. The gods and the multiplicity of the inside world is still very prevalent in Hinduism or other religions. And so there is this notion that we have complexity, and we have a complex language, which is actually incredibly useful for the modern day and age, because we now live in a complex world. Used to be complicated, now the world is complex. And the difference to me is that the difference from complicated, world's always been complicated, but between complicated and complex is emergence. And we have now things that emerge overnight, things like COVID, wars, things that affect every human being on the planet instantly. I have argued that COVID was the first global event ever, a really truly global event that affected every human being. And so these changes, these sudden emergence that change everything, that change the playing field for everybody overnight, make the world complex, because you can't predict those things and you can't prepare for those things. And so a complexity capability is the ability to respond to this new world that we're in. Complexity capability means that astrology, that is already a complex language of multiplicity, is a very suitable language to understand the new world. Which is one of the reasons that I've argued that astrology is a healing language for the 21st century. I've said that decades ago, because it can do what is necessary in these new times where the old tools just don't do enough. And another way to show the inner multiplicity and the complexity that we can all do naturally is, if you're in the middle of a fight with your significant other, and the phone rings and it's your boss, and we all know, like that, we all switch, we become a different person within a second. You can't do that if you're a singular identity. That only works because you have these different roles that you know how to play, and each of them can be refined. And so the developmental aspect of archetypal astrology, from my perspective, is that each one of these characters can be independently developed, which is really important. So we're not denying developmental thinking, but we're saying it's actually a combination. I don't know of any other model that combines both developmental psychology and archetypal psychology. And so what that means is that, you can have a professor who's absolutely brilliant but can't match her socks. So this kind of explains that very easily. Of course not, because those parts the different parts of her are developed differently. So that thinking is very useful in a modern world where we think in multiplicity anyway, and in complexity anyway. And if we have that language, so these 10 planets are like a full set of keys on the piano that can play any song, and you can play any story, any situation, any stress, any trouble, any happiness, any human experience that you can ever imagine can be translated back into astrology. Right back to the dream, you can do the same thing with the dream, which is a reflection of human experiences.
Do you think that when people know their sign, but they don't know their full chart, it all becomes a bit too reductionist? And so people say, oh, I'm an Aquarian or I'm an Aries or whatever it is. And they just sort of dump down whatever's been read. Do you think that's a bit defeatist?
It's extremely defeatist and it's very limited. It's like saying all of psychology can be boiled down into being an introvert or an extrovert. That's pop psychology or pop astrology or pop dream work. I dreamt of a snake going through a tunnel and, so I'm sexual or something like that. That's extremely simplistic. And most people stay at that level. That's what I was talking about before. To go to a deeper level of actually meaning making and making it useful, we have to get off of TikTok and get off of sort of this superficial one-liners that have very little meaning, and we need more depth, and that's going to take some effort and some studying and some real reflection and some discernment and these kinds of words that are very unpopular these days, and it's very necessary, but. It's also very clear, and that's being shown increasingly, that without this discernment or with this reflection or with this sort of simple journalistic interest in finding out, people are bamboozled very simply. And then these stereotypes, happen very, very quickly. And that's my big beef against, Jung's typology. I think it's extremely limited. I think it's really wrong. And it does exactly that. It says I'm an INTFJ, and therefore I'm separate from all the other 15 types that are not me. I'm not the INTFJ, but if somebody is, I don't know what I am. So, we become put in a box. And I work with leaders around the world as a leadership development and a leadership coach. And I will tell you that leaders especially do not like to be labeled and be put in a box. It is incredibly, rude, I think, and just simplistic to say, well, you're this type. And so, Jung's typology is, there's 16 types, basically. Astrology is a typology. When you do sun signs, there's 12 types. So I'm a very aggressively anti-typology person because most types are stereotypes. And I don't like stereotypes. And so an Aries is aggressive and a Libra is too friendly and all this kind of, and then Scorpio is oversexed. It's just stupid. And so, and it's also human because we like to understand and put things into boxes that we can understand, but it's not complex. And so it's not really future fit. And to be future fit, you have to be able to hold opposites. You have to be able to hold complexity. You have to be able to do these things that many people are not equipped for. And so they're suffering and falling behind or falling directly into this notion of, well, just tell me what to think and I'll be okay. Here, you do it for me. I can't figure that out. That's too hard. So we want to help people get comfortable with their own complexity capability, which is an innate gift we all have.
So I'm an Aquarian. So if I kept dreaming about holding a big pot and water keeps pouring out of it, where would you go with that? Am I tapping into the archetype?
But you've already told me that your moon is in Capricorn, and therefore we're only talking in a much more complex way than for sun sign astrology. You'll never get me to talk about a sun sign. It means nothing. It means like saying, giving me your shoe size. You might say something about your height, but that's about it. It's extremely limited, but what I find interesting in what you've told me so far is that the moon in Capricorn and the sun in Aquarius are extremely different, and therefore there's an argument going on your inner stage between the king and the queen. Now that's a story.
And so true.
The king says, leave me alone, I want freedom, I'm going to run out of here and do my own thing. And the moon says, no, we need structure and order and let's keep everything nice and quiet. Exactly. So that's an inner struggle between your inner masculine, your inner solar, the sun, and your inner feminine, the moon. That's fun. Now we have a story. Shakespeare gets excited and starts writing. This is good. That's different than saying, here's my label, I'm this way. Exactly. Nothing happens then.
Yeah.
So we want that. Now imagine we throw in 8 more characters, and now we really have a good story.
Yeah. And then how do they surface in dreams to bring it back, obviously, to dreaming?
Exactly.
It would be lovely once you've got these archetypes present on the board, for want of a better description. Exactly. How are they interacting? And the psyche will definitely throw that up in the dream world.
Absolutely. And if it's important, and that's why I particularly like recurring dreams. There's like, how many times you need a knock on the door before it breaks the door
That's
down.
exactly, that's what I always say. The psyche keeps knocking on the door. Are you going to open it at some stage?
And I get a little more, aggressive about that. I say the first time Mars knocks on your door, he's polite or she's polite and uses a feather. The planets aren't gendered. Is polite and uses a feather. Second time, and you're in there vacuuming with your earbuds in, so you're not hearing anything. Second time, Mars uses, a finger. Third time, there's a knock. Fourth time, there's a pounding. Fifth time, the door just gets broken down. But Mars will enter, invited or not. That's what Jung had that over his door. The gods will enter, invited or not. And that is exactly the key to astrological thinking and to dream thinking too. The gods will enter, invited or not. And what happens then, you get, if you're not listening, you get PTSD, you get trauma, you get nightmares and so forth. And so a nightmare to me is literally, a horse arriving at night. And I want to know more about the horse. It's nothing bad. Of course, it can be uncomfortable and really scary, but I want to know about the horse. It's a gift. It's coming to me. What does it want to tell me?
It's been so lovely because I work with dreams a lot, and I've started to bring in astrology within the dream groups, and you start to see themes emerging in dreams, right? Of a very passive ego that never does anything, and just everything seems to happen around. And I remember in this time we looked at the astrological chart, and it was a very compromised, as you would say, Mars. It was, I think, a Mars in Cancer square Saturn, which you would say it's more difficult for that Martian energy to come out for that person. And it's what I find from astrology is then it gives you this kind of anchoring and then the guide to, well, you need to help this Mars out for you, right? You're not owning it. You might be projecting it out. You might not be expressing it in the healthiest way, but you need to give that Mars a bit of energy in your psyche. And it feels easier than just sitting with a dream without this kind of tool.
Absolutely. And the whole idea of working with a chart, instead of just saying this is who I am, is development, is how do I, activate this part of myself that keeps hurting. But people need an image first. They need to have something they can imagine that's happening. And that's why astrology can be very, very powerful when used in an imaginal way. Giving stories like I just gave you about the king and the queen on the stage, that's something that I can work with. I can wake up in the morning and saying, who's in charge right now? My queen is telling me to clean up the freaking kitchen because it's still dirty from last night. And the king is saying, let's go out for a walk. So who am I listening to? And you start to think about an inner life that is alive and that is interesting. And you could have had that dream of a king and a queen fighting over the dirty dishes or taking a walk, and you would see that it's the exact same thing that's going on in the chart.
James, I'm sure you were in my kitchen this morning, and that feels like almost like a sort of piece of CCTV. That was literally my conversation this morning. It's beautiful. I absolutely love it.
And thanks for calling me James. I used to get upset, but
sorry, Laurence. Sorry.
Now I find it an honor. I find it an honor. He was a brilliant man. So it's not a bad name.
Exactly.
But,
I bet you'd be thrilled with the work that you're doing. It's it's really quite incredible.
Thank you. Speaking of that, to me, it's always been that, the big pushback against archetypal psychology has been that there's no methods, there's no rules, there's no how-tos. And that's not very teachable. And it's very difficult for people. And a lot of people get frustrated. People who are more earthy than my father was, who had no earth in his chart, suffered from that. And I have 5 planets out of 10 in earth, and I'm very grounded and practical. And I'm a builder, and my father was more of a destroyer of people's sort of fixed sets. So I always talk that I spend my life building sandcastles. He spent his life kicking them down. Different needs. They're both important. I'm also a trained architect, so I really am a builder. But and so I always thought that what archetypal astrology can do is give those very practical how-tos and methods and rules. And actually, after 48 years last year, I finally decided to teach an introductory course with everything that I've learned, how to be able to decipher a chart, not read it, that takes a little more time, but how to be able to decipher a chart in a 9-week course which is really intense, but that's available now also if anyone's interested as a evergreen self-taught recording. And so that you can just go in and actually learn this incredible language. It's such a useful tool. So that's how I see it. So I always thought of myself as standing on the shoulders of those who went before me, including my father, who brought us, Jung and my father, and even Freud with the conscious and the whole idea that there's these other worlds. But then now let's give people a practical tool that they can actually use it. And to me, that's astrology.
I have a real personal learning from what you just said, and reading the work of your father and then going into archetypal astrology or through psychological astrology through Liz Green. For me, a real big moment that made me study astrology was, having fixated so long on the parental figures, right? On mom and dad did this, and I'm so upset with mom and dad. And my dreams would show me how awful my mom and dad were to me. And it felt stuck a bit, no matter how much therapy, we're still stuck with these images. And then I read in archetypal astrology and in the Soul's Code that, well, actually, those are the archetypal images you're born with, not your actual mother and father. And I had actual proof that that was true. I knew that people perceived my parents very differently, and they were more than what I just had them as in my head. And that was such an incredible insight for me, because now when they appear in my dreams, I know those are my images. That's me. That I came into the world, as my chart would describe, with an expectation of in my case, an Aquarius moon, of a distant, a bit more remote, a bit colder mother. That's not actually how my mother is. So it's so interesting. It switches the perspective a lot. And then you own the work, and then you get to see your parents for who they really are, which is an incredible gift. So this feels really powerful, what you just described to me about archetypal astrology, because you take back your stuff and then you engage with the archetypal world, and then you see people as they really are, at least a bit more,
That's what a great story. Thanks for sharing that. I can sort of just back that up with, I say something similar without using that more personal example. I always say there's 3 ways to go through life. The first way is to say life happens to me, which is victim mentality. A lot of people live like that. My parents did this, I didn't have enough of this, and so therefore it's someone else's fault that I'm miserable. That's very many people live like that. Many people go to therapy, live like that. It's a victim mentality, life happens to me. The other way, the second way, is to say, I make life happen, which is very American fantasy. Take your gun and go west, young man. It's your responsibility. Pull up your bootstraps, those kinds of things. It's an ego idea. I'm in charge. If nobody does anything for me, I got to do it myself. That's the ego way. And the third way is to say life is already happening all around me all the time. My job is to figure out what's happening and then to co-create appropriately in every given moment. That means I have to know what's going on, and there's different ways to figure out what's going on. The way I find out what's going on is I look at the planets. And that, again, we're back to zeitgeist and the quality of a moment. So there is that way to live, which is to be aware of, becoming completely in the moment and not living in the past or the future, but instead living really in the moment, co-creating with all the energies that are available to us, which are massive amounts at any given second. We miss almost all of them.
You described this so beautifully. I was thinking that being in the moment, how we came to find you was through a dream, through Maria's dream, and how she first contacted you. Maria, do you want to just tell us a bit more?
I love to tell this story because it's one of those magical dream stories that I have a couple of dreams that have been really powerful for me. And this is one where you don't need any interpretation. It was about maybe a year or 2 years ago. I don't even remember. But I had a dream that I was in Italy in some beautiful sort of rural area. And I get to this Airbnb and I find that the host had a book by James Hillman. And I was like, oh my God, James Hillman, you read James Hillman in this remote place in Italy. And she's like, oh yeah, not only that, but actually James Hillman lives just around the corner with his son. And the wave of excitement for me was like, oh my God, he's alive and I can meet him. And he has a son. I never thought about this. And of course, I woke up from that dream and I'm like, James Hillman has a son. I never thought about his personal life ever. And first thing I Google is James Hillman's son, find Laurence. And it was just when I was starting to deepen my astrological studies and think about all these things and find out Laurence is an archetypal astrologer. I cannot describe the level of excitement. And this is partly how we ended up having an interview a while ago and now this interview today. So dreams are huge. I'm so glad. It took me a long time to listen to that dream and actually contact Laurence, but here we are.
Well, thanks again for reminding me. It's a great story. And, it just shows you the thin veil between this world and those other worlds that Jung and Freud introduced us to. And in those other worlds, there's no time. There is no a lot of the limitations of our world, of our conscious world, fall away, and it makes it, we can fly, we can do cool things, and breathe underwater and do fun things that make it, that are possible in the dream world and in this other world, because we're not limited by the physicality of this world. And so it's a lovely story of synchronicity. Yeah, beautiful.
So, Laurence, many thanks for joining us. It's been an absolute pleasure. And I think Maria has got even more exciting news for members of the DRI.
Well, Laurence is coming to London in August, on the 26th of August, that's a Tuesday, to teach us about dream work and archetypal astrology. So this is going to be an exciting workshop for anyone who has some interest and knowledge of astrology. And we're going to be together for quite a while. It's going to be a longer workshop, and I'm very excited. I'll be there. And we hope you will too. There will be more details released about that very soon.
We'll put obviously links on the show notes and everything, and obviously links to all of Laurence's work and how to contact him, and obviously links to some of the books that have also been mentioned. Laurence, once again, absolutely wonderful. Have a lovely time. I presume that the sun is not setting much currently up where you are.
No, it is quite beautiful. I'm on an island in the very northern part of Sweden, looking out at the Baltic, and it is quite stunning today. It's a gorgeous day. It's sunny. It's starting to get warm. I came here on May the 2nd, and it was the coldest May on record in Sweden. So we're pretty chilled, but we love that because I live in St. Louis, typically in the United States, and it is hot there in the summer. So it's very nice to have the cool instead. So we enjoyed it a lot.
Thank you, Laurence.
Enjoy that, and see you in London.
See you soon.
So thank you for joining us for this week's episode. Don't forget to like us and leave comments on your favourite podcast platform. As I'm sure you know, that's the way we build an audience for the Dreamboat podcast, and also to spread news about dreaming. And as we said, there are many ways you can share your dreams at the DRI, the Dream Research Institute.
Yes, we have courses, events, and workshops, and we want to hear from you. So check out the show notes for links, or find us on Instagram and on our Facebook page and on our website at driccpe.org.uk. And if you want to explore your dreams further, or you would like to support us, you can join the DRI as a member for just £30 a year. As a member, you will get discounts for all of our events and short courses. You'll get our newsletter with latest dream research news, and we'll also be adding other special member benefits during the year. Of course, members' dreams will always be given preference for reading on the podcast Dream of the Week slot. So go to the link on the show notes and become a DRI member today. Keep dreaming and keep sharing your dreams.